All right, today we're going to be looking at trees. We're trying to find wood for a few different things around the homestead. We're wanting to timber frame a barn, and so we need some structural wood. And we're also going to be building a nice deck patio for our hot tub. So we want to get some structural wood for that too. But we're also looking for all the other pieces, parts that we're going to need to build the barn and the deck. And we're probably going to use, because we're out west, we have a lot of softwoods. We don't have much hardwood out here. So what we're looking through is all the softwoods that are on the property. And we're going to kind of show you some of the trees that we're looking at and maybe explain a little bit in detail about why we're going to use that tree and what we're going to use it for. If you're back east and you're watching this video, you probably have a lot more hardwoods, oaks, and things like that. So softwoods might not be as readily available there on your property, so you have to do some research on your own and figure out what's good for what. But out west here we have a few softwoods that are really popular. One of them is what's called a Douglas fir. It's called a red fir. There's seriously like 100 names for this tree species, and partly because people fight over who owns the species or whatever. Anyway, so that's a really great structural wood. And we're going to look at some of Doug fir trees today. And then we're also going to be looking at some pine trees. And these are what are called yellow pine, ponderosa pine, something like that. And they're really beautiful woods, but they have so many knots and things that they don't really work super good for structural wood. Not that you couldn't use them, but they're not very clear. So they have to be bigger or something to accommodate the weaknesses of branches in the wood. So we thought we'd give you a little tour of some of the wood that we're looking at on our property. We'll kind of explain the technique that we're going to probably use to cut some of these trees down, some of the challenges in getting them down safely, and maybe even explain how to identify a couple of these trees. In case you're watching this video and you're out west, you can use some of this stuff to identify the timber on your property. So hopefully you'll follow along with us, and let's get going. Okay, so one of the first trees that we've been trying to find is a Doug fir tree, because we have so much structural work to do that this is really the most important tree for us to be able to harvest. We did some research. We can use pines for this stuff, but we're going to have to use much larger timbers. And so to keep the structure a little bit smaller, more compact, we're probably going to try to use as much Doug fir as we can. So the tree right here in front of me is a Doug fir, and it's about probably 80 years old, maybe 100 years old. That might be on the high end. We know that because these trees start dropping their branches. They're what's called self-pruning, and it takes about 80 years for them to start dropping their lower branches, and they do that to conserve resources. So this guy's one we're going to look at. We're not for sure going to cut this down because we've got some stuff behind the tree that might be potentially in the way. And because the tree actually has a little bit of a lean to it, at the base, it's a risk for it to go ahead and topple that direction, which we actually want it to go the other direction. So we're going to mark this tree, and we're going to keep it in our inventory, and then we'll decide whether we actually want to cut it down or not. So a couple of things that you can do. We're going to use spray paint, bright pink spray paint. You could use a bright ribbon, and that'll help you kind of just look through your harvest and see what trees you have marked. And it's really good to start keeping an inventory. One thing that we need to do is calculate the number of board feet of lumber that we need and timbers. And one of the reasons that we're going for old growth type timbers here is this tree really doesn't produce a lot at this age. It's kind of just there, and it's crowded by these other trees. So we'd actually be better off cutting this larger tree down, giving this younger tree room to breathe, and then it'll continue to grow and become an old tree like this one. So a couple things, we're going to mark them with spray paint. You need to know your board feet of lumber that you need. That way you're not wasting timber. And the way you can kind of calculate that's to measure the circumference of the tree and the length of the tree, and that'll give you a rough idea about how much lumber you can get out of there. So we're going to go ahead and mark this with spray paint. We've got some bright pink spray paint, and we're just going to mark a ring around the tree. That way we can identify it from a distance. We don't have to keep walking through here and trying to maybe name them, like this one's Mickey Mouse, that one's Garfield. You know, spray paint's a little easier than naming your trees. So we're just going to put a ring around it. Alright, so we have ourselves yet another Douglas fir tree here. This one is a little bit different though. It's on a slope, and so it'll be a little challenging to fall it properly. If we fall it downhill, we risk it snapping the top of the tree. If we fall it uphill, it turns into a massive tree sled and will slide to the bottom of the mountain very quickly because the tree branches will just snap off and the thing will slide to the bottom when none of that sounds safe. So the challenge here will be trying to follow this one along the side of the hill. And in that case, the branches should keep it from rotating, and we can then cut it up into lengths and we can haul it out of here. So we've got another fir tree. It's probably around about 80 years old also, and looks like it'd make a great timber frame. So we'll go ahead and mark this one, and we'll keep it on our inventory. So we thought we'd do just a small segment on tree identification. This is definitely not college level here, so we just give you the basics so you can kind of start to identify trees on your own property. Basically, a fir tree is any kind of tree that produces cones. It's a conifer. So a Douglas fir isn't really a true fir, even though a lot of people call it a Doug fir. But when you're trying to identify a Douglas fir, there's a single needle on every branch. Every needle is attached all on its own, and they're very short little needles. In fact, most Christmas trees are Douglas fir because they're very soft. You can actually stroke a Douglas fir tree. You can pet it, and it won't poke you. In fact, fir needles are what get all over your floor when your Christmas tree is starving for water and it starts to drop all of its needles. So here's a tiny little Doug fir needle. This little guy, it's in my finger. And then here's a Doug fir branch. And you can see that the needles are attached one at a time. So the difference with that and a pine tree is that the needles come in bunches. So this is a pine needle, or the fruit of a yellow pine or a ponderosa pine. And it comes in bunches of 3. There's actually 3 needles here, and they're all attached to a single point. And when they're on the tree, this is what they look like. So they're in big bunches at the ends. You can't really pet a pine tree. They're kind of pokey. If you try to pet it, you'll end up getting poked. They call them pine needles for a reason. So this is a bunch of pine needles, and you can see that they're attached to the branch in groups. So if I pluck one of these off, you can see that there's actually 3 needles attached to a single one, and that's how we know it's a yellow pine. There are other pine trees, and they're attached in groups of 2, 3, or 5. And that'll tell you the basic species of the tree. So just a real quick tour of some tree identification. Bark and things can be really hard to identify, but needles are almost always a dead giveaway. I mean, not only that, but the length of these needles will tell you that it's not a fir tree. Most fir trees have very short needles. They're about 1 inch long. Even on a massive tree, they're only about 1 inch long, and they're very soft. So if you're out in the forest and you're petting trees, you're probably petting a Doug fir tree. Otherwise, you're getting poked a lot by a pine tree. So, on to the next tree. So we thought we'd also explain another reason we're picking certain trees. It's not necessarily just we need lumber and we're like looking for big trees. What we're actually looking at is kind of forest management. Not that we have a huge forest here, but we want to pick and choose the trees based on, the health of the trees, their harvestability, and their usability. Kind of thinking ahead, like the next generation or 5 generations, if you will. So a good example of this, we actually have 4 trees right here, and I'll kind of stand around so you can see them all. We actually have 3 fir trees here, here, and here. And then to the other side here, we have 1 pine tree. And the reason for marking these for potential harvest is that they're all grouped together. And what that means is they're all fighting for the same resources. They're struggling to get water. And so by having 4 trees this close together, they're also tangling. They're getting all wrapped around each other as they try to get up above each other to get sunlight. And so we'd be better off giving 1 or 2 of these trees some space so it can get resources, get water, and it can also get sunlight, and then use the others to build with. So it's partly harvesting for our homestead, but it's also just good management of your land. We'll show you another example here in just a second that'll show you what happens when you have too many trees growing together, which is a very common problem on our public lands right now, is that there's so many trees competing for space that none of them can get big and healthy and strong and turn into a usable product. So we're going to look at probably cutting at least 2 of these down, maybe all 3, 2 firs and 1 pine, and leave the younger fir tree. It looks healthy, everything looks good, and let it continue to grow to the sky. So I'll go over here and let me show you another example of bad management. Not so that somebody didn't do something, but what happens when you don't kind of selectively manage trees and the consequence of it. So I'll see you over here. Alright, so here we are nearby, and we wanted to demonstrate to you what happens when trees are too close together and how you end up with basically a useless tree. Not that that's a true thing, but as it comes to using it for harvesting or using it for timber, it's basically useless. So what we have is a couple of fir trees here. There's actually 3, and right between them is this guy. And he's leaning really far. At the base, he's leaning out, and then he's curving around the other guy. He was leaning away from this one at first, then he ran into this one, so he went that direction. So this tree looks like a bow and arrow. It's got a huge curve in it. So at best, this tree is good for firewood. It doesn't have long enough straight sections to even try to harvest timber from it. And it's leaning so far that if it were to have any erosion or anything like that, it would definitely fall over and become a hazard. So we want to leave the trees that are good, straight, sturdy, and strong there to keep the root mass intact. And then take this guy down eventually, not today or for this particular project, but probably just cut them up for firewood and let these other trees get big, healthy, and strong so they can be harvested later. So part of what we're doing is just good forest management. This is a good example of when these trees were tiny. If this guy would have been plucked out, these two probably would have grown bigger already, and they would be much more useful trees. So when you're working with your land, don't just go out looking for trees to cut down. Think about what you're cutting down and why. If you find a big, nice tree that's all by its little own lonesome, it's healthy, it's strong and tall, you might think twice about cutting that tree down. But if you get something like this where they're all competing for space and no one tree can benefit, try picking selectively which one you cut down. A lot of cultures that have mastered arborists, they actually plant trees deliberately a very specific space apart so that they will grow tall and round and straight, which is very good for lumber. So this is just an example. We thought we'd show that to you, and we'll see you on the next tree. Alright, so we found our next species of tree. This is a pine tree. It's a yellow pine, and so what we're probably going to use yellow pine for is all the decorative stuff. It's a beautiful wood. It's got a lot of knots in it, which is one of the reasons it's not the best structural wood, but it makes great cabinetry, flooring, furniture, deck railings, a lot of stuff like that. You do want to protect it because it is particularly prone to bugs and rot, so we do need to make sure we get some sort of a finish coat on it. But otherwise, it's a very light wood, and so it's very easy to work with compared to the more dense hardwoods. They're really heavy. So this is a pine tree. We're probably going to go ahead and harvest this one, and for all the same reason we just shared in the other video there. It's competing for space with all these trees right here, and these trees look like they'd be better to keep. This one we can probably go ahead and cut down, and we'll use it for things like cladding, so that'll be behind the siding. We'll use it for underlayment for like the roofing, stuff like that. And yeah, so this is a pine tree, and that's what we'll be using that for. We'll see you on the next tree. Alright, so we got our trees tagged, or we tagged a bunch of them. We're not sure how many we're going to need, but we kind of wanted to get an inventory of what we have. So I've got my inventory right here. That's all the trees that we tagged today. And also just good to kind of spend some time with the trees and see what else is out there. We're not going to cut every single tree down, obviously. So we got that all done. Up next we'll be actually choosing which ones to cut. And we'll probably do a video on felling or falling trees, however you want to say it. Kind of talk about some of the challenges, some of the safety on that, and then also the tools that we'll be using. Certainly something that's helpful to know. So we'll be doing that in a future video. There's a few other tree species out here. We're not sure if we'll include those in the video or not because we're not sure we'll use them. They're really useful for cabinetry and things like that. So anyway, we got that all done. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and you found the information really helpful. If you enjoy videos like this, you're watching it on YouTube or on our blog, please subscribe to our blog, which is purelivingforlife.com. We also do YouTube videos, so if you enjoy YouTube's, please subscribe to our channel so you can get all the future videos as they come. We also do Facebook and Instagram, so if you like either of those channels, don't hesitate to follow us over there. We do a lot of mini posts there, so we just give you little updates on what's going on. Of course, we look forward to doing giveaways, so if you don't want to miss out on those, or if you don't want to find out about them when they're already over, subscribe to the blog there, and we'll see you in the next video.